It had been years since they last met, with no contact since their final encounter. The relationship had become so thin that Wēn Yǐfán had almost forgotten this person's existence. But she still remembered. Their last conversation hadn't been pleasant. It wasn't the kind of relationship where he would come over to comfort and help her when seeing her in a disheveled state. Wēn Yǐfán's first reaction was, he must have mistaken her for someone else. But another thought floated into her mind. It was also possible that over the years, Sāng Yán had matured and become more broad-minded. He might have long since put past events behind him, letting bygones be bygones, and was just being polite upon seeing an old classmate. When Yifan pulled herself back to the present and handed him the jacket, her eyes filled with confusion and inquiry. Sāng Yán didn't take it, his gaze passing over her hand. Then he said flatly, "I'm the owner of this bar." When Yifan's hand froze in midair, her reaction somewhat slow. For a moment, she wasn't quite sure. Was he introducing himself? Or was he bragging about how well he was doing now, having achieved success at such a young age and become a boss? In this situation, she found herself distracted, recalling Zhong Siqiao's words. The owner of this bar is said to be the top host of Degenerate Street. Her gaze couldn't help but sweep over his face a few more times. Dark hair, handsome eyebrows, pupils of pure black, appearing even colder in this light. The rebelliousness of his youth had faded, his once immature features were now sharp and clean-cut. Tall and slender, even his all-black attire couldn't conceal his arrogance and pride, exuding an air of willfulness and nobility. To call him the top host, it seemed, indeed, well-deserved. Sāng Yán slowly uttered two more words, pulling her back to reality.
Surnomme Sang.
Was he telling her his surname? So, he hadn't recognized her and was just introducing himself. When Yifan understood the situation and calmly asked, "Is there something you need?" "I apologize. Due to our mistake, we've caused you trouble and inconvenience," Sāng Yán said. "If you have any requests, please let me know. Also, all your expenses in the bar tonight will be on the house. I hope this won't affect your good mood." He used you in a formal manner, but when Yifan didn't hear much respect in his tone. His manner of speaking was still the same as before. It sounded perfunctory, lazy, cold, and somewhat irritating. When Yifan shook her head and politely said, "That's not necessary. It's fine." Hearing this, Sāng Yán's expression relaxed, as if he had breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps thinking she was easy to deal with, his tone softened a bit as he nodded. "Then, if you'll excuse me." With that, he turned away and started to leave. When Yifan was still holding his jacket and instinctively called out, "Sāng." Sāng Yán turned back. As their eyes met, she suddenly realized that they were now strangers, and the yen got stuck in her throat. Her mind went blank, and when Yifan didn't know how to address him, the atmosphere became awkwardly silent. In her flustered state, the blank was filled with the content of her earlier wandering thoughts, and two words surfaced. Staring at his face, she belatedly added, "Top host." Their eyes met. The world fell silent once again. In this nearly frozen moment, when Yifan thought she saw his brow twitch almost imperceptibly.
Huh.
What did she just say? Sang top host.
Sang.
Top host.
Oh.
Sang, "Oh shit." Aha. Sang top host ah. When Yifan's breath stopped, and she almost couldn't maintain her expression. She didn't dare look at Sāng Yán's face at all, pursed her lips, and once again held out the jacket to him. "Your jacket." The best solution was to do as she always did, pretend nothing inappropriate had happened, that nothing had occurred at all. To simply skip over this little episode. But Sāng Yán didn't give her that chance. He turned his head and slowly repeated, "Sang, top, host." When Yifan pretended not to understand. "What?" After a moment of silence, Sāng Yán looked at her, somewhat surprised, as if he had just realized something. He drawled an, the corner of his mouth slightly curved, with an as expected expression. "Sorry, we're a proper bar here." The implication was probably, I know I'm a beauty, but I've never considered that kind of service. Please show some self-respect. When Yifan wanted to explain but felt she couldn't explain clearly, she secretly let out a sigh, too lazy to struggle. Since they wouldn't meet again anyway, she decided to go along with his words, saying with feigned regret, "Is that so? That's quite a pity." Sāng Yán's expression seemed to freeze for a moment, but it might have been her imagination. When Yifan blinked and saw that his expression was still as calm as ever, showing no change, she didn't pay much attention to it, politely smiled and mentioned again, "Your jacket." Sāng Yán still showed no intention of taking it. For the next 10 seconds or so, when Yifan strangely noticed him staring at the curve of her lips, his gaze direct and thoughtful. Just as it paused, "Wearing my jacket," Sāng Yán paused, suddenly smiling. "Aren't you quite happy about it?" Wēn Yǐfán, "Although I'm not quite sure, but it seems I'm more famous than this bar?" He raised an eyebrow mischievously, his words carrying a hint of understanding, as if giving her a way out. "Take it back as a souvenir." He said that. Zhong Xiqiao confirmed again, bursting into laughter. "Impressive. Why didn't he just tell you to frame it and hang it up?" When Yifan slowly said, "That's exactly what he meant." Zhong Xiqiao held back her laughter, offering token comfort. "Don't take it too seriously. Maybe this happens too often, and Sāng Yán just assumed you came here to see him." "Have you forgotten why we came here?" When Yifan asked. "Huh. Wasn't it to freeload?" When Yifan said, "How can the word see match his words and actions?" Zhong Xiqiao started laughing again. When Yifan also laughed. "All right, take it easy. Wait until he leaves to laugh. He's still sitting there." By now, the high stools at the bar were all occupied, with Sāng Yán taking the seat at the very edge. He picked up the clear glass on the table and leisurely took a sip of wine, his expression composed and at ease, like a carefree young master. Seeing this, Zhong Xiqiao finally contained herself. Just then, the waiter who had spilled the drink earlier came over. This waiter was a young man, looking quite young with baby fat still on his face. He carefully carried a tray and served the drinks. Then, he returned the money when Yifan had paid earlier, placing it under the folder with the receipt. "This is your drink." When Yifan looked at the money, "This is..." Before she could finish asking, the waiter hurriedly explained, looking somewhat uneasy, "I'm sorry, it was my fault earlier. The boss has already instructed that your table is on the house." When Yifan then remembered Sāng Yán's words. After a pause, her first instinct was to refuse. "It's all right, there's no need. Please take the money back." The waiter shook his head. "Besides this, if you need anything else, please feel free to call me anytime." His attitude was very firm, so when Yifan didn't insist, she picked up the jacket that was placed aside. "When I went to the restroom earlier, I found this jacket in the hallway. It might have been accidentally left behind by a customer." The waiter quickly took it. "All right, thank you." After he left, Zhong Xiqiao winked at her. "What's going on?" When Yifan briefly explained, Zhong Xiqiao's eyes widened. "If he said that, why did you still want to pay?" Running a business isn't easy. When Yifan took a sip of her drink, there's no need to take a few hundred yuan from him over something like this. "Why are you worried about a rich second generation's entrepreneurial hardships? This young master has been wealthy for a long time," Zhong Xiqiao said, "but he doesn't remember you." When Yifan made a reasonable guess, "He probably didn't recognize me." "Didn't recognize you?" Zhong Xiqiao found it absurd and blurted out, "Come on, don't you know what you look like? Just because your name has a fan in it, you think you're ordinary?" When Yifan almost choked, speechless and amused. "From your tone, I thought you were scolding me." It's no wonder Zhong Xiqiao found this answer unreasonable, because when Yifan was truly beautiful, completely at odds with her gentle personality, her appearance was extremely alluring and beautiful to the point of being aggressive. Those fox-like eyes seemed to come to bewitch souls, with slightly upturned corners, every gesture exuding charm. Sitting in this dim bar, she seemed to emit her light. Zhong Xiqiao had always felt that she could become rich and famous just by relying on that face. Who knew she would end up becoming a hardworking news reporter instead? Besides, you look pretty much the same as you did in high school, just with shorter hair now. Catching sight of movement from Sāng Yán's direction, Zhong Xiqiao quickly changed her words. Well, it's possible, I suppose. With his conditions, he must have dated quite a few girls over the years. Maybe some were similar to your type. Hearing this, Wēn Yǐfán rested her chin on her hand and looked in Sāng Yán's direction. This time, there was a woman next to him. As if impervious to the cold, the woman wore a tight-fitting short dress, revealing two slender white legs. She was half leaning against the bar, tilting her head to toast him, smiling charmingly, her curvaceous figure clearly outlined with every movement. Sāng Yán looked up at her, with a half-smile. In this atmosphere, it also carried a hint of flirtation. This topic was brief, and soon Zhong Xiqiao started talking about other things. Her attention drawn back by Zhong Xiqiao's voice, Wēn Yǐfán withdrew her gaze and continued chatting with her. After a while, the female singer finished her last song. Noticing the time, Wēn Yǐfán asked, "It's almost 10. Shall we leave?" Zhong Xiqiao, "All right." The two stood up and walked towards the exit. Zhong Xiqiao linked arms with Wēn Yǐfán, looking at her phone while saying, "Xiang Lang just told me he's coming back to the country next month. Next time, let's invite him to join us. We'll go somewhere we can dance. This place is a bit boring." Wēn Yǐfán responded, "Sounds good." Before leaving, she glanced at the bar one more time. Sāng Yán was still sitting in his original spot, with seemingly another woman next to him now. His face still showed no emotion, as if he was indifferent to everything. Their unexpected reunion truly seemed as he had shown, just an encounter with a stranger. Wēn Yǐfán was lost in thought. She inexplicably recalled their last meeting before they lost contact. A cold night, moonless. Dense fog and dark clouds pressed down on the small town, fine rain falling like fur. In the narrow alley, the only streetlight flickered, with flying ants recklessly crashing into it. The young man's hair was wet, his eyelashes dotted with water droplets. His skin was pale, and the light in his eyes extinguished. Everything seemed unreal. She couldn't remember how she felt at that time. She only remembered. Sāng Yán's voice was hoarse as he called out to her one last time. "Wēn Yǐfán." Then he lowered his eyes in self-mockery. "I'm not that bad, am I?" She also remembered. He had shed all his pride, viewing himself as something filthy to be avoided. "Don't worry," he smiled. "I won't bother you anymore." Ever since spilling the drink on the customer, Yuzhua had spent the entire evening on edge. He was extremely careful in everything he did, fearing he might make the same mistake again and reignite the boss's recently subsided anger. After this table of customers left, he went to clean up. As he collected the glasses, Yuzhua pulled the folder, and the few red bills pressed underneath were brought along. He paused. He also noticed a bracelet that had fallen under the soft chair. Yuzhua picked it up and walked back to the bar with a heavy expression. He pushed the tray in and said to the yellow-haired bartender, "Brother He, the customer at K11 dropped something." He Mingbo took it and looked up, saying, "By the way, that jacket you brought over earlier, doesn't it look a lot like Yanji's?" I don't know. They said it was picked up in the bathroom, thinking about the money issue." Yuzhua scratched his head. "Brother, Yanji just told me this table was on the house, but K11 didn't take the refunded money. Should I tell him about it?" He Mingbo glanced at him. "Go apologize." Yuzhua was stunned, feeling he needed to explain. "Brother, it's not that I want to pocket the money. K11 didn't take it. I told her several times." Putting the bracelet in a clear bag, He Mingbo smiled and said, "Yanji, isn't that reasonable?" That seemed to be true. Although he thought this, when Yuzhua went upstairs to find Sāng Yán, he still couldn't help but make a last-ditch effort. He had seen Sāng Yán at the bar all evening, not knowing when he had gone upstairs. Now, he was sitting in the innermost booth of the VIP area, his expression indifferent. It was unclear if he had listened to you, Zhu's explanation. Sāng Yán didn't speak, casually playing with the clear glass in his hand. The atmosphere was almost oppressive. Zhu steeled himself and spoke to ease the tension. This might not be payment for the drinks. I just heard these two customers saying. At this point, he suddenly realized that what he was about to say wasn't quite right and began to stammer. But it was quite noisy around. I didn't hear very clearly, so I'm not very sure it's just. As soon as he met Sāng Yán's cold gaze, Zhu shuddered, and his words suddenly became fluent. I heard the customer's friend ask her if she came to this bar to see you, Yanji, and she said no. Sāng Yán's eyelashes twitched slightly. Zhu. Then she said it was to freeload. Sāng Yán. Sāng Yán? Question mark. So this might be the payment for freeloading you.